Good evening, everybody. Oh, now, come on. Good evening, everybody. It's an audio event, so I need to hear you. I'm Frank Sesno, Director of the School of Media and Public Affairs, and Brian Williams couldn't be with you this evening. It's really painful. It's really painful for those of us in journalism and for those of us who care about the news and who care about what the public gets and sees and thinks about what we do. So it's, my heart goes out to Brian and to all of those of us in the business, but it's also important to stand for credibility. So this is something worth watching. The good news is that we have an unbelievably great program here this evening. And as somebody who started in radio, I am so anxious to hear what this group has to say about what the sound of news and the sound of information and the sound of storytelling is doing. As you probably know, we have a number of fellows who join us at the School of Media and Public Affairs each year. And one of our fellows this year is Barbara Bradley Hagerty, who has been one of my favorite people on NPR for many years, covering religion among many other things, with a writing style and a sound and a deft touch at storytelling that brings you into the characters that she illuminates and brings you into the story in ways that you don't want to picture because the picture is flashing in your head. And that is the magic of radio and sound, that ability to flash the magic in your head. I do want to take a moment to thank our National Council, our advisory group at the School of Media and Public Affairs, and others who, through their generosity, make people like Barbara Bradley Hagerty and events like this possible. I'm going to apologize to you in advance because partway through this event I'm going to have to duck out. It's Washington after all, and I'm supposed to drop by something else, but I will be with you for a long time, so when you see me leave, please don't think me rude. With great pleasure then, I would turn this over to Barbara Bradley Hagerty, former correspondent from NPR, author, and great friend of the School of Media and Public Affairs. Take it away, Barbara.
Oh, there's an on-off switch.
You have audio people here, Barbara.
My microphones generally don't get turned off and ever off. Let me just ask you a couple of questions here before we get going. How many of you all have heard Serial? Oh, okay. How about This American Life? Wow, all right. Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me? Now, how many have heard This American Life and Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me? How many of you all kind of typically listen to it real time on the radio? And how many on podcast? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, how many people listen to traditional radio? Well, that's pretty good. You must have been raised in what do we call them, car seat NPR listeners, where you're kind of strapped into your car seat and you grow up with it, NPR? Well, terrific. Well, if you've ever wondered about how you put together one of these long-form audio pieces, how hard it is, how expensive it is, how people think up their topics, anything like that, then I really think you're going to have a terrific time tonight, because what we're going to do is we're going to kind of pull back the curtain and take a look at how you put together podcasts and radios, especially podcasts, radio pieces and podcasts. We have a really, really great, like a star-studded cast here tonight. And it would take me a really, really long time to list all of their awards, but let me just give you a brief introduction to each person here. First is Alix Spiegel. Alix?
That's me.
Okay, that's you. Alix has won every conceivable award. She's won the Peabody, the DuPont, the Livingston, a bunch of others. She was a founding producer for This American Life. She joined NPR as a science reporter and began focusing on psychology. And now she co-hosts a program called Invisibilia. Has anyone heard of that program? Right. It instantly became the #1 downloaded podcast in America, and she tells me today it has been downloaded 15 million times. Andrea Seabrook, there we go, was for years NPR's congressional correspondent. She won the highest award for her political reporting, the Joan S. Barone Award. And then in 2012, kind of in the stunning act of daring, she decided to start her own podcast. She left NPR. She started something called DecodeDC, kind of before it became really, really cool to do that. Mm-hmm. And she's going to talk tonight about how you actually begin a podcast. Linda Holmes was a lawyer, so, watch out. Lawyer before she became a pop culture maven. She came to NPR to write their pop culture and entertainment blog called Monkey See, and then she launched a hugely popular, instantly popular podcast called Popculture Happy Hour. Has any of you all heard that? Okay, great. And then finally, last but not least, of course, is Guy Raz. He is by day, host of TED Radio Hour, and by night he teaches a class at GW on audio reporting and audio storytelling. He was a foreign correspondent for NPR for several years. CNN briefly won him over for a couple of years before we managed to get him back.
Couldn't keep him.
Yeah, couldn't keep him. He also has won...
Oh, sorry. Huh.
Yeah. Is it out?
Yeah,
oh my gosh, really? Yeah. Okay. How long is it? Have you heard all about Guy? Okay, because I'm happy to tell you about it. Plus, I want Frank to come back and talk a little bit about me. I really enjoyed that part. So Guy has won a lot of awards himself. He's won the Edward R. Murrow Award, the Daniel Shore Prize. He hosted Weekend All Things Considered for several years, and then he became the first host for TED Radio Hour, which has 10 million monthly downloads, right? Huge. Okay, so we're going to get going with this right away, but 3 logistical points. The first is that after we talk for about 50 minutes or so, we're going to open it up to questions, so keep your eye out for a microphone. Second, there's going to be a reception after the event. And third, please silence your cell phones now. Great. Wonderful. Okay, let's get going. First, we're going to start with the origins of the podcast. How did your podcast or your radio program come into being? In other words, kind of just give us a little bit of an idea of where it came from, where the ideas came from, or in Linda's case, how a blog became a podcast. So, Alix, why don't we start with you?
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did Invisibilia come into existence? Well, I was working on the science desk as a human behavior reporter, and I met Lulu Miller, who is, for people who listen to Radiolab, she was one of the founding producers of Radiolab, and I just thought that she was so cool and great. And then I asked her if she could work with me so that I could learn all of her radio tricks, which, P.S., I still have not done. And then we just worked together, and we had such a good time that we went to Ann Goodenkoff, who's my boss for the last 10 years, and said, hey, can we do a podcast? That is literally, that's what we said. And she said, why don't you make some pilot episodes? And so we did. And then we went to the powers that be at NPR, and we said, here are our pilot episodes, please, 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 please. And they said, sure. That's basically how it happened. It was born out of more like this relationship more than anything else.
Great. Andrea, tell us.
Yeah,
can you
this.
Give us a story?
Thanks.
Yeah, how many of these microphones actually work?
I think two.
Two.
I think this
Okay.
one does not.
Okay, got it. Okay.
I kind of feel like I should go last, actually, because
go last?
yeah, I kind of want to go last.
Okay.
I want to hear everyone else's NPR origin story before I give mine.
Okay, great. Hey, Guy.
Yes.
You're up.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, our show, basically, TED approached us. They were interested in collaborating with NPR. It's about 2011. NPR launched a pilot of the show in the summer of 2012. It was a 10-episode pilot. It went quite well, but TED felt that the show should be reimagined. There was a different host for that season, and so I at the time was hosting Weekend All Things Considered, and I was I was enjoying it. It was great, but I had a conversation with the guy who runs NPR's programming division, and we talked about whether I might be interested in this. I had been in news my whole career, so it seemed like a kind of a weird thing for me to do because I was a news person. And this was definitely not going to be a new show, but they sort of wanted to think of a kind of reimagined version of what this show was. We were doing some experimentation on the show that I was hosting at the time, All Things Considered, on the weekend. And one of the reasons why we could do that was because we had the great luxury of, unlike other shows on NPR, which is that nobody was listening to the show. Andrew is also a host of that show, so she knows. So we could, we could literally just come in naked and broadcast, and nobody in the building would even know. So we were trying all these interesting things, and we, around November of 2013, I became the host of TED Radio Hour. It was not yet a show, and we gathered a team. We now have, it's me and 5 producers, 2 of whom worked with me on All Things Considered, so who came to the show. And we basically sat in a room for 2 months, starting to imagine what the show was going to be and starting to build the first 6 episodes. And that's really how it started. We launched on March 1st of 2013.
How quickly was it popular?
Pretty much right away, and I'll sort of explain why. Not because the show was awesome and we were so great. A lot of it. Thank you. A lot of it had to do with the great luck that we have these 2 huge, for lack of a better word, brands, NPR, TED, coming together, and it's like, it's kind of pretty hard not to be noticed because those are 2 huge media brands, especially in the audio world for NPR. So. That's sort of how it began.
Great. Good. Linda.
I did come to NPR to write their pop culture blog, and it is true that I was a lawyer, but I was the nice kind. And in 2010, my best friend Stephen Thompson, who also works at NPR in music, he and I were talking, and we thought that it would be fun to have a thing that was like a conversational show about pop culture. It was the model for us in a lot of ways was the All Songs Considered roundtables, which he had also participated in, which at the time he was doing with Bob Boilen and Robin Hilton and Carrie Brownstein. And we thought they were great, thought it would be fun to do, and thought that if we asked anyone, they would say no. So we figured, tried to find a way to do it without asking anyone, which we sort of did. We found a young producer, Mike Katzif, who's willing to come in and work with us kind of around the edges of the other stuff he was doing. And we just went in a little studio and didn't really, we sort of said, we're going to do this and maybe we'll ever do it again and maybe we'll never do it again. And the people we worked for said, fine. And there was an existing podcast feed that they were using for kind of an arts roundup, a roundup of like arts radio stories. And we asked them if they would mind if we kind of shared their podcast feed so that we could send it out without asking anyone. And they said yes. And so we had our first official meeting about the show 2 years after we launched it. And that's sort of how the show came to be.
So I'm just curious, how did it get popular? How did people begin to notice it?
Because it was good.
It's first of all, it took a really, it's weird for me even now to talk about it as popular. It's still a small show compared to like a lot of these shows. It's still a small show. I think we built an audience over time by talking about things that people were interested in, but also the show is very personal. It's very kind of chemistry driven. It's driven by the fact that the people on the show like each other, and you get to know kind of who's interested in what, and we have really different interests. And we started out with 4 kind of regular chairs, but now we have kind of 3 regulars and a rotating 4th chair, and we bring in some of the people who sit in that 4th chair now are people from on air. Guy's been on our show. Audie Cornish has been on our show. Ari Shapiro has been on our show, but a lot of them are also NPR producers, and so we have a real variety of folks and work really hard to bring in a good variety of people.
Great. You are up.
Okay.
Here, let's give this woman a microphone.
Give me
This
that.
one.
And then
Oh,
we'll go with
okay.
I think you have to turn that
Hello?
around.
Okay, yes. Yep.
Up, hit, up. Okay.
There you go.
I wanted to, I feel like I should explain myself. I wanted to go last because my experience is so vastly different than everybody else's, because I actually left NPR to do my podcast. In fact, I tried really hard to get NPR to let me do my podcast, and it just was too soon for NPR to be on that track. And, I mean, I never got a no from NPR. I got yeses and yeses for months and months and months until I couldn't stand covering Congress in sort of a 3.5-minute he said, she said version at the top of ATC every day, all things considered every day. So I don't mean to bash NPR, but I personally could not do that anymore. And actually I submitted my resignation without telling my husband. I then called my husband and was like, hey, guess what? DecodeDC came about I gave 2 months' notice to NPR, and in fact, my editor at the time didn't actually turn that into HR because he didn't believe that I would leave. And that was the sense, I mean, the whole world thought it was the equivalent of leaving the New York Times Magazine to start a blog. It was like, you're going to leave the top of your game at NPR, having hosted shows and been, in Congress, to go start a podcast. And so, yeah, I did. And then DecodeDC came about because of that, because I really wanted to cover Washington in a different way that didn't play into the left-right crap. I felt like we were being used and lied to every day in the Capitol, and we were being made to be a mouthpiece for that. And I wouldn't do it anymore. So I basically said all that in a Kickstarter form. And 3 weeks later, I had $100,000.
Can you just tell us about the stress of those 3 weeks?
Yeah.
Tell us what that's like.
Yeah. Well, when I put the Kickstarter campaign up, I didn't have. Here's how naive I was, and this is what you should never do. Don't start a Kickstarter campaign without having an episode up yet, because people don't know what they're funding. Luckily, I had the breadth and weight of all of these people and NPR behind me, so people sort of knew what I was. But I started this Kickstarter campaign. I set the goal. I tried to be reasonable about how much it would take me to do a year's worth of a podcast. I set it at $75,000. People were aghast. Those 3 weeks, I set it for 3 weeks, were the most stressful 3 weeks of my entire life. All day long, all night long, you have to be a constant PR campaign when you're trying to raise that much money that quickly, all by yourself. But in the end, I made $100,000 and have made DecodeDC. I did for a year and change by myself, bringing on young producers to work with me, and to one of them went on to work at Gimlet Media on Startup and some of the other shows that are coming up now. And then in 2013, I was approached by Scripps, the EW Scripps company, and particularly one of the top producers in the business, a woman by the name of Ellen Weiss, who is here today. And I went to work with them. And that's just a tiny little piece of my show. We're still on, and if you're not subscribed, you should subscribe now.
That's great. That's great. Terrific. Well, we're going to hear a little bit of tape now from everyone. And Linda, you're going to be first up, just so you know. Okay, got it. So what I want to talk about right now is a little bit of the content of your topics. How do you put together your show? How did you decide what topics to do? Like, so for example, Linda, we're gonna hear actually just the top of one of your podcasts. But if you can just talk a little bit about how you make your decisions, because there's a lot of stuff going on out there in the entertainment and pop culture world. So how do you do it? In the Monday morning, do you get up and go, okay, this is what I'm going to do? And then we're going to hear a little of your clip.
Okay. Our particular show, it used to be that we would decide, like, on Monday afternoon what we were going to tape on a Monday night, which was a really bad way to do it. Then we got our producer now comes in at the end of each show and starts talking to us about what we're going to do the following week. And that's much better. Because then you have time to, like, see a movie, for example. So we typically start deciding, we tape on Tuesday for Friday. And so after we tape on Tuesday, we'll start to have a conversation about what we're going to tape the following Tuesday. And If there's a big movie coming out, if there's a big TV show premiering, we'll talk about that. If there's a big thing in the news. We used to do award shows, but now we're kind of not doing those as much anymore because I think we felt like we were exhausted. But now the other thing is that because we're doing that rotating fourth chair, we also try to keep an eye on what those people that we use as fourths are doing, what they're writing about. And for example, if Audie interviewed somebody that we think is totally fascinating who has a thing coming out, sometimes we can have Audie come do the show and talk about that. We work a lot with the people who do NPR's Code Switch project, which works on race and ethnicity issues. We are very, very close to them. They're sort of our kind of closest affiliated project in a lot of ways, and so we work closely with them to keep an eye on kind of what they're writing and what they're interested in, because when we started the podcast, there were 4 of us and we were all white people of similar age, and what we said to each other when we started the show is, we can do this, we will start it this way, but if we're going to start it this way, we're going to have to be massively careful and aware of trying to look for opportunities to expand from that. So we keep a close eye on our fourths and what they're doing. And so a lot of it comes from that.
Right. So we're going to hear a clip now, and maybe just right afterwards, you can just tell us why you why you took the angle you took. So.
And that's the kicky music that means it is time again for Pop Culture Happy Hour. I'm Linda Holmes. I'm the editor of NPR's Pop Culture and entertainment blog Monkey See. On this week's show, we'll dive into Selma, the civil rights film that may or may not be an Oscar nominee by the time you're listening. We'll get into the direction, the huge cast, the very Oprah of it all, and how it does at bringing one of the best-known American men of the 20th century to life. Right. So typically each week we have what we call the A and the B, because we're brilliant, which is like, typically there's like, the A topic will be something topical and current for that particular week, and the B topic will be something that's, kind of evergreen, like we could talk about that any week. And so the A topic this week was Selma. That was a good example we had a really nice fit with Gene Demby, who works on Code Switch, because he had just written a piece for Politico about the new civil rights movement and had written about the history of the civil rights movement of the 60s at the same time. So Selma was out. We were interested in doing Selma, and it was a great opportunity to bring Gene in and have him kind of introduce some of the research that he had done and the history that he knew. And so, that's kind of how we decided to do that. It was a big movie, and we had a great opportunity to bring in one of our favorite folks to talk about it with us.
Great. It was great. It was a great show. Let's see, Andrea, this will give you, I love what you did with this podcast. Can you, I'm not going to say maybe, why don't you describe what it is and kind of how this plays into your whole vision of DecodeDC?
So a young black man was driving his car in L.A. and was pulled over by the LAPD for having a broken tail light. When the cops got out of their car, they walked up alongside with their pistols drawn and took him out of the car and turned him around, put his hands behind the back of his head, and the keys were digging into the back of his head. So he said something to that effect, at least the records show. And one of the police officers immediately put him into a chokehold until he passed out and fell to the ground and woke up spitting blood and more. Listen to the podcast for more. This was in 1976 in L.A., and what happened was this man then sued, based on his civil rights, to due process and fair treatment under law. It got to the Supreme Court in 1982. One of the justices on the Supreme Court at that time was Thurgood Marshall, the great-grandson and grandson of slaves, first African-American on the Supreme Court. And the man who had been put in a chokehold was ultimately ruled against the next year by the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision led by Justice White. And Thurgood Marshall wrote a scathing dissent to the decision. And what is so fascinating about this, and what really gets to the heart of DecodeDC, is that we try really hard to bring forth the background of the stories that you're hearing every day and help educate all of us. It's not like I knew this story and just did it. I mean, we're constantly looking for a way in to understand things like what happened to Eric Garner on Staten Island. So I guess we should play the clip, and I'll talk a little bit about it.
Great.
The 4 justices in the minority who would have supported Lyon's case signed on to a scathing dissent written by Justice Thurgood Marshall.
It is indisputed that chokeholds pose a high and unpredictable risk of serious injury or death.
This is Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Clarence Page reading from Marshall's dissent.
An officer may inadvertently crush the victim's larynx, trachea, or hyoid. The result may be death caused by either cardiac arrest or asphyxiation.
He laid out a bunch of evidence that had been collected in the case, starting with the fact that the Los Angeles police had killed 16 people with chokeholds in the preceding decade.
12 have been Negro males.
The 4
So that was that dissent was written in 1983, more than 30 years. Is that right? Was my math right? More than 30 years before Eric Garner would be killed, lying face down on the street in Staten Island in a chokehold. So one of the interesting journalistic things behind that story, and you should really listen to the whole thing because we pulled tape from Thurgood Marshall's oral arguments, and there's, this giant of a man, the most important civil rights lawyer, saying to, the courtroom in the Supreme Court, when the police officer puts his arm around my neck, can I protest then? Things like that. And it just shows you how long this has been a problem before we think of it as a problem. And there's some really, talk to me afterwards about some interesting journalistic discussions we had about how to make this piece afterwards. I don't want to take too much time.
And I want to, this is actually for all 3 here on this end who use sources. Can you just tell me a kind of, okay, obviously you got the idea because of the news, right? But how do you go about finding your sources? How do you, in this case, how did you do that?
In this case, the story had been dug up by a reporter, Dave Gilson, at Mother Jones. So you may have seen a couple of graphs. They wrote about it on their website. And I called Dave because a million years ago, back in like the early noughts, Dave and I worked on an alternative radio show, which aired on one station, which would have been a podcast today, called B-Side Radio. It was me and Tamara Keith and all these people, and Hannah Jaffe-Walt, and all these people who are huge today sort of got together and were like, we want to do public radio differently, and it aired on one station. But so Dave was part of that project, and so I called him up and said, hey, Dave, there's got to be more here. And we pulled the oral arguments, and we got Clarence Page to read the dissent, and, we made this piece.
That's great. That's great. So, Elise, we're going to hear a clip from your first show.
Right.
Maybe you can just give us a little kind of this. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you came up with this idea? Because it's a rather esoteric idea. It's invisible.
You mean the idea of Invisibilia,
No,
or the idea of like
this
thoughts?
one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, so I think that so just to give you a little bit of background and context, basically this is a show about how do you conceptualize your relationship to your thoughts, which is like, a little abstract. But actually, I had been a reporter covering mental health for 10 years, and I actually just saw this evolution in which happened in kind of therapy. I just watched it happen, but there was no. And this is actually part of the reason that the show exists. I saw this happen. I was very interested in it, but there was no way to explain it in 8 minutes on any NPR show.
Elise has never done a story less than 8 minutes.
It takes me like 3 minutes just to say my name. I just, for whatever reason. Anyway, so this is a story about like the whole show was about how Freud took thoughts really seriously. He thought, okay, you have a thought like, oh, I want to kill my mother. I don't know, and then you assume, for example. I love my mom. But anyway, somebody else has that thought. And then, but like you can, as the therapist, you can be like, oh, well, do you take that thought serious? Like, if you take the thought seriously, then you trace it back to its origins and you try to figure out what it is connected to, and then you're liberated. That's one conceptualization, is that your thoughts actually mean something. Then it moved to cognitive behavioral therapy, which is they're like, maybe the thought's real, maybe not. And now the more popular therapy today is like, your thoughts have no relationship to you. It's kind of like, it's like a Zen Buddhist way of looking at your thoughts, which is like, they're just these synapses popping off in your heads, and most of them don't mean anything. And the story is about this man who, watches this movie one night, and then he starts fantasizing about killing his wife, and he can't get these thoughts out of his mind. So in that case, like, it's very important to understand, do these thoughts mean that I am a psychotic killer, which is what he believed originally, or do these thoughts not mean anything? So that show came out of, I had just watched this happen. I grew up in the home I was the granddaughter of like a psychoanalyst. And so I grew up having one ideology around my thoughts, which is that they're meaningful. And then I just, as a reporter, watched this evolution, and nobody had written about it, and I couldn't figure out how to write about it in 8 minutes. And so, did I answer your question?
No,
so that's how that happened.
Yeah, no. And actually, I want to ask you about how you found your sources afterwards. But first, let's just...
And then, so we don't have... You just pulled the top, right?
I just pulled the top.
So anyway, we had to figure out how to get in to raise this, because you can't like say to a group of people, oh, we're going to talk about how you conceptualize your relationship to your thoughts now. Because they'll be like, like, look at the time, gotta take a shower. But so I, like, what I did was, so we just, like, this is how we started our very first show. It was actually, we started with this question, what were you just thinking? Just to get, and which is actually literally the best question I've ever asked as a reporter in my entire life, because you always get an interesting answer. Yeah. But anyway, so this is the top of our very first show, our baby show.
And let me just say,
yes,
before
it
you start,
is. Oh.
Before you start, we've heard a lot of things, kind of random things, like, a little boy said, or a little girl said, well, I was thinking, why did you ask me that, or something like that. So we've heard a lot of
yes.
random
So it's
stuff.
not from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Right. So basically it starts with like the very first, I say, so what were you just thinking? And the very first thing you hear is somebody said, who the hell are you? Yeah. And that's the very first, that's what they were just thinking. And then you kind of, I literally walked through the streets of DC just being like, you. And people had wonderful things to say, really. And it was and like, you could have sat down with any one of those people and just like made a story out of that, but we didn't.
And this got scary.
Yeah. So there you go, I guess. Yes, it is. And the truth is that it's not just thoughts in general that we're interested in. Really, it's this subset of thoughts that we want to focus on.
Yeah, those last ones you just heard, the dark ones. I'll always be alone. No one will love me.
You know these thoughts.
I'm waiting for the train, and the train is coming, and there's this moment right when the subway train's coming out of the tunnel and the lights are coming, this flicker of an impulse to just throw myself down the tracks.
They come into our heads at random moments. Sometimes they're kind of shocking.
All of a sudden, I had an image of myself strangling them.
And the thing that we want to talk about today is, how should we think about these dark thoughts? Do they tell us something deep about ourselves, about our desires and our wishes, or not? Right.
So can I ask you?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I didn't know. I have nothing to say. Continue.
So, actually, were you getting names like this woman who said, "Yeah, I felt like doing"?
That was actually an interview with somebody who has. It turns out that the guy in the story has OCD with harming obsessions, and I actually talked to many of those people, and so that was actually just like a legitimate interview in a studio with somebody like that.
So that gets me to the question: how do you find people to focus on? Because this whole story is, this fascinating story about this guy who wants to kill his wife, or thinks he does.
He thinks he wants.
Yeah.
He fantasizes, and like all other kinds of horrible, awful things. Because in fact, he is like much nicer than anybody. He's like more moral than anybody. That's his main problem.
Right. How do you find these people?
How do I find? Okay, so often, in that case, I just called up. I just called up this place. It's this place called the OCD Center in LA, and I ask, oh, can you send out a blast to your patients who are struggling with harm OCD? And then a bunch of patients contacted me, and then I interviewed a bunch of them. And, you know, that's just a mix of, like, how do you find your subjects is just a mix of, like, are they somebody that you, like, cotton to in some way, and or who's open. And I didn't know that much about him before I went to see him.
Wow.
I mean, I knew a little bit.
Right.
He seemed nice. And he was nice.
You weren't afraid for your life.
Oh, I was never afraid for my life.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
No.
Wonderful. Okay, Guy. I know I'm a big fan, but I love the show, and it was really hard to decide which show to pull. But you helped me with that. So we're going to hear one right now, but can you just talk to me a little bit about what it was like interviewing this person? And afterwards, I want to ask you about how you put together the shows, the different themes. But give us a kind of a preview of what we're going to hear.
So this is if you haven't heard the TED Radio Hour, basically the concept is we pick a theme and we find TED speakers who've talked about something related to that, and then I interview them and we play clips of their TED Talks, and there's music and production stuff, and it's all hopefully everybody comes out of it feeling a little bit better about themselves, I hope. Although we've had some episodes where I've sort of come out of it feeling worse about myself. So, but ideally, I mean, the idea behind the show is that it's really about us. You know, you remember like when Jerry Seinfeld was asked to describe a show, and he's like, "It's a show about nothing," and people ask me what the show's about, and I say it's just a sort of a show about our own. Like, you know, our own behaviors, and we just did a show about secrets recently, and this idea that we all have secrets, and that they can actually be incredibly corrosive, you know, when you keep them inside. So this episode that we're about to hear was about the source of creativity, and I was at the TED conference. There's two main TED conferences a year. There's one in Vancouver and then one overseas, and Sting was there. Sting. You know, you know, Sting kind of gets a bad rap. He's sort of uncool.
He is?
Yeah, and you know, and
let's have a show of hands. Is Sting uncool? How many say Sting is uncool?
Okay,
Good.
all right, good. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so that's great. That's he gets a bad. And anyway, all right. So Sting is very cool. I think is cool. So he stood up to give a TED Talk about, I didn't really know what it was going to be about, and he had a guitar, and it was about a story he was telling about. It was sort of half a personal story, but half about these characters that he created for a show that he would eventually mount on Broadway, which he mounted. I think it began in December, called The Last Ship. About these characters he grew up with in the north of England, in Northumberland, in a shipbuilding village. And it was amazing because it was such a personal talk. I mean, he was talking about something that happened in his life that I did not know and that nobody in that room knew, which is that around 2002, he lost his ability to write music.
Stop. We're going to play the clip.
Okay. Sorry.
I don't want to, but was it cool interviewing him? Were you
Yeah.
nervous? I would have been nervous.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always a little bit nervous. I'm nervous now. I always get nervous when I sort of perform or interview people because you want to, you really want to connect with that person, you know. And it was great. It was really, it was actually really meaningful to talk to him. I really enjoyed talking to him a lot. He was, yeah. So.
Great. John?
There were 3 more albums, 91, 93, 96, all the way up to 1999, into 2003. It was non-stop. Sting was like a creativity machine. And then one day, it ended.
I would look at the page every day and think, you know, what I'm going to write about, and day followed day, and weeks turn to months, and pretty soon you have a couple of years where you haven't actually put pen to paper, and you have to ask yourself why. What is it?
How long did this go on?
I think it was maybe an eight-year period when the flow of songs stopped, and I wasn't idle. I'd certainly play. I would practice, and hopefully refine whatever artistry I had. But the desire to write something down was not there. It simply wasn't there.
That creative drive that pushed him to write so many songs for 20 years had just disappeared. And day after day, staring at an empty page, Sting started to ask himself some pretty big questions he raised on the TED stage.
What have I done to offend the gods that they would abandon me so? Is the gift of songwriting taken away as easily as it seems to have been bestowed?
What I love about that is you use all these different elements. So you've got music, you've got kind of an intimate interview, you've got then him on the TED stage. I mean, it's just a really nice kind of melange of, it's a lovely kind of mix of things there. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you come up with your themes? Because it's not one TED talk that you focus on, you do several, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically the show is about us. So we sort of we tackle relatively simple ideas. I say tackle sort of tongue in cheek because we'll do a show about fear or about happiness or about secrets. I mean, we're not breaking news on the show, right? We're not. But the hope is that we're talking about things that might sometimes seem self-evident, but when you really listen to somebody describe it, or you hear somebody talk about, why we do things, why we think things. We're working on a show now about the brain that's going to come out next week, and it's really amazing. I mean, we know so much about the brain, and we know there's so much we don't know, which seems again self-evident. But you start to have these conversations with people about where does creativity come from? And do we all have the capacity to be creative? The answer is yes. We all actually have this capacity. One of the people on the show was Charles Lim, who does fMRI research. He has people doing creative things, and he sticks them in a scanner, playing jazz. So one of the things we try to do is, it begins with a talk. If there's a talk that I like, or if there's a talk that I've seen at TED, it usually begins that way, and I try to sort of build a theme around elements from that talk. So, for example, at TED last October, it was in Brazil, Glenn Greenwald gave a talk. Now, he's spoken all over the world, right? He's really interesting and provocative and controversial, but his talk was. What was important to me about his talk was that he answered a question in very simple terms, which is, why should I care? Which is a question a lot of people ask, why should I care? And I thought he was really effective in how he did it, whether you agree with him or not. And I thought, maybe this is an opportunity to do a show about secrets. So we started to look around for other talks that could work in that theme, and we found some really incredible stories and narratives and also research. And that's more or less how we construct shows.
How long does it take you to think of a show?
It depends. I mean, I just came up with a new show. It took me, a few days. We were all sort of banging our heads, and I just sort of barricaded myself in a room for a day and in and out, and just watched a lot of talks, and basically this idea came. The idea of we're going to do a show about play, about games, about the importance of play, which again, at this point seems really weird and sort of hokey, maybe, but as we sort of develop it and really talk through what it's going to be, I think it's going to be a pretty cool show, cool episode.
Great. Andrea, I'm going to go to you next. I want us to talk a little bit loosely about kind of economics and how much it costs to put together a show, because actually you hear about podcasting being a profitable business now. I mean, maybe not all podcasts are, but they're beginning to turn a profit. So can you just talk to us a little bit about how much does it cost to put together a show? How long does it take? How many people are involved? Do you guys make money?
The big variable in the answer to all of those questions is scale. The more listeners you can get as fast as you can get, the more profitable you can be. It sounds simple, but remember, you're creating one podcast, and if you can get that in front of 10 million ears a month, you can make much, much more money off of either if you're doing underwriting, if you're asking for money the way you do on public radio, or if you're running advertising, you can hire lots more producers and do better work. When you're starting with no one, you're still making the same podcast, and you want it to be as good a production, as quality a production, as quality an idea as the one that gets 10 million listens. And so, you can make money in podcasting. Serial proved that, certainly, but and I think everybody here probably makes money in podcasting, but having the engine of great listeners that NPR has matters. It matters a lot, and it does. I don't mean to take away from anybody's work, but I mean, when you have access to those feeds of people already subscribed, if you listen to any NPR podcast, you'll hear they're going through this rotation of all of the best, the top 5 podcasts, promoting to one of the 5 every week, all at the same time, and it's just boosting all their numbers. I know this from the vice president of programming, who's very open about it, is what they're doing, and it's they have this giant presence, which they should have. When you start your own thing, $100,000 sounds like a lot, and then Amazon Payments takes 5% of it, and Kickstarter takes 5% of it, and you use probably 25% of it on the T-shirts, tote bags, and mugs, and, oh my God, the postage. Please never forget the postage. It's huge, and you're suddenly down to more like $60,000. And you've promised a year's worth of podcasts. And so what I did was hire one production assistant who was a great writer and brilliant and knew nothing about making radio, and and paid her on contract. I mean, it's a slow build-up, and it takes time. And so that's why when I'm in front of a mic, I say, and you should go subscribe to DecodeDC. It's a totally different planet. And if you're trying to do the kind of production-heavy, idea-heavy, thoughtful, great quality audio that everyone on this stage has done their entire career, then that's expensive, and expensive in people, expensive in time, because great producers equal time.
Actually, and I want to throw this open to everyone. Let me ask you about, I don't know who voices the advertisements themselves versus, are you allowed to, are you not allowed to? What's the criteria for that? How do you feel about that? So who wants to answer that?
I can go first, because I threw that out the window pretty quickly. Originally I was aiming for the public radio stations myself outside of NPR, and so I did sort of a quasi-underwriting, quasi-advertising thing. After I sort of went to Scripps, and by the way, one of the big reasons I went to Scripps, besides the fact that it's an amazing media company, and you should all look into it, is that I was tired of doing the business of it, and I wanted to just get back into the journalism of it. But I have no rules. I mean, one great thing about not being at NPR is I don't have to worry about who cares about how I phrase this or that when I'm talking about our advertisers. I can just say, you should buy this Casper mattress. And that sounds like a sellout, but does anyone really care about the difference between support for this is from Casper mattresses and you should buy that, so I just, throw all the rules out and voice my own advertising.
You write your own?
They often send copy, which I often throw right out the window because it's terrible. People write terrible ad copy. And you've heard, Alix Bloomberg is doing really awesome fun. You don't have to do it in a dumb way, and we're trying to get more creative so that it's not just like buy this thing.
How does he do it?
Oh, it's interesting. Like, so he basically does his ads on his program. So there are 2 programs in his company. Do you guys know about Gimlet and Startup? And how many people here know about Startup and listen? Okay, and how many people know about Reply All? Okay, so for those of you who don't, Alix Bloomberg used to work at, This American Life and also NPR, and he started Planet Money, and then he went off on his own to create his own podcasting network. And the idea was, and how he does his ads is he basically does them as documentaries. So and they're very inventive, but he's also kind of like an ad guy. I think he charges more for his podcasts than I know NPR does. And I think in part because he is also providing that service of, he is kind of doing ads too. You
don't voice your own ads.
No, well, how do you do it?
Yeah, so we do it slightly differently. This is one of the quirks of NPR, which is So the short answer to it is I do voice ads. Both Linda and Alix work under the news division of NPR, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm in news.
I work under our programming division, which is more sort of like arts, entertainment, cultural stuff. Back after Labor Day, I think it was in mid-September, we launched a pilot to see if we could advertise in that way. So
advertise in the Alix Bloomberg way, or what?
Slightly different. So we have pretty short ads, about 25 seconds. I write them, and it's about we have various sponsors like MailChimp and Stamps.com, et cetera. It's me and Peter Sagal, who hosts Wait, Don't Tell Me, and Ophira Eisenberg, who hosts Ask Me Another. And we have discretion. We can decide not to do it if we don't want to do it. But in my case, I feel like it's important to be transparent about it. We have to pay for what we do. We have a staff of 6 people. As Andrea said, it's expensive to produce high-quality radio, and we have to pay for it. And those ads, as we say in the podcast, it's only on the podcast, by the way. It's not on FM radio. If you hear the show on the radio, you will never hear this. But it's on the podcast. It's in the breaks. You can choose to fast forward through it, hit the 30-second button on your iPhone. But basically what I'm saying is, hey, just quick thanks to one of our sponsors who helps keep the show on the air. And then a couple lines, and then we move on. We have now done 2 rounds of surveys of our listeners to test what they think. And remarkably, astonishingly, we haven't received a single negative comment about it. In other words, the people who are listening digitally, they skew a lot younger. So the average age of our digital listeners is about 35. And what we found is that younger listeners just don't really care. It just doesn't, they're not offended by it. They don't find it to be unethical or this or that. In general, it's been fine, and we're very sensitized to it, so we're watching it closely, and so far, so good. But of course, we're constantly reevaluating it and kind of checking our compass on that.
Well, there's something you should know also, and that is anyone can list a podcast on iTunes, which is sort of the powerhouse of catalogs of podcasts, right? That's the place where people find new content. You cannot list a podcast on iTunes for money. So if you want to be on the big catalog, which is iTunes, you have to have either a profit, a business model of either making money from advertising or from underwriting. That's it. Or like a Kickstarter campaign for every season, a crowdfunding campaign. That's another one that's common. But we don't have the choice of 99 cents per episode. We don't have that choice unless you list under iTunes U, and you'll never be found there. Those are lectures of professors all over the place, and they're awesome. But that's the podcasting model, the way they set it up, won't let you do that.
Great. We're basically out of time, but can I just before we open it up to questions? But I just wanted to see if you all have kind of 30 seconds of advice for people who are thinking about going into this world, like, how hard is it? What do they need to be prepared for? Any kind of tidbit of advice for people who want to get into this business. So, anyone? Bueller?
My show is completely different from all three of these shows, and that's kind of what I'm realizing more and more as I sit here. They are all really like brilliantly produced, awesome sounding radio shows that have a ton of production involved. There is a whole other world of podcasting that does not originate in public radio. That is people at Earwolf and Maximum Fun and Nerdist and a bunch of other places where a ton of podcasting is happening, and most of those shows are like my show. They are shows that are low input, and they actually don't have to have a large staff and a ton of people. They still need production help. And the thing that drove me crazy about there was an article about Serial that said the great thing about podcasting is like you press a button on your computer and Serial comes out, which is literally the most maddening thing I've ever heard. That is not true. But what I would say is do not assume that every podcast has to be this kind of big input, big preparation, large staff institutional project. NPR makes great shows that are like that. Those shows have to exist for the good of NPR and for the good of everybody. But if you can figure out a way to get like the ones that are kind of low input and don't cost a lot of money, but they come up with great conversations and introduce you to new stuff, alongside the stuff that's like beautiful audio and wonderful production and the kind of stuff that these guys do, you're going to have a world that's just going to like... So that's my advice.
Let me add to that also that great high-quality production doesn't have to be, cost $1 million either. I mean, there's a guy here, Dan Bloom, who does Madcap DC, which is a great podcast, and you should listen to a lot of great podcasts that are, smaller right now, and you'll be totally hip when everybody else gets in on it. But, he's like, he's a guy, he has a day job, and he's just an amazing producer. You can just have the free version of Audition on your laptop and do a lot of what we do. And the longer you do it, the better your production is going to be. My favorite podcast in the whole entire world is this thing that Mark George on the DecodeDC staff pointed me to, which is called No Such Thing as a Fish, which is this crazy BBC show. The people who research the weird-ass facts on a quiz show in DC, in London, on the BBC, sit around a table with mics and talk about the weirdest fact they found that week. And literally, it's like my dream job, basically. And it's my favorite podcast of all time.
Yeah. Good. So actually, I'm just curious. So Linda, you could get away with a couple of people who like each other, who have some kind of chemistry, and a microphone and two microphones in a kind of small room with good acoustics, and you could do it.
You could, but our show, you can, but our show in particular, it sounds that way, but we have 4 people in a room who often talk at the same time. We tape for about an hour and cut down to about 42 or 43 minutes. That's because we have a producer who sits there and takes all the boring parts out and the parts where we sound dumb. And that's there are times where people say, like, I listen to a lot of conversation podcasts and I think yours sounds really good. And I say, well, I would love to take that as a compliment, but A, we have a great producer, and B, our microphones cost more than your car. And that's not anything I did. That's the advantage that we came into. So no, shows like that still need help. They still need production. You got to pay the producers. This is a world in which young producers can really get hosed because they want to do these passion projects. They can really get hosed. You got to help them. You got to develop that ethos of kicking a buck, which is like literally $1. There are so many things that you listen to and enjoy that if everybody gave $1 once a year, it would transform the financial model of the thing. That still has to happen, even with those really kind of low input things. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
Great. No, wonderful. And actually,
I love young producers.
One of the we got an email. Guy and I got an email saying that you have all these kind of megastars here on the panel, but you should have people who have just started something up, who've started at night, sitting in their closet, right, talking about their thoughts. And it's evolved into something really great. So next time we will have another panel on people who are really starting up on a shoestring. We'll try that.
Can I just add one thing really briefly, Barb, which is that I think Linda makes a really important point, which is anybody can. I mean, you can find the thing you love. Let's say you love, I don't know, new wave from 1981 to 1983, and like more about it than and you can find your tribe, you find your community, or like so much about industrial rock from like 1992, and that's going to be your podcast. Like you can do that, you can find your tribe. The thing about what Linda has done, and you said this earlier, and I thought to myself, it's not accurate, which is their podcast, Popculture Happy Hour, was the reason why it's so successful now is because of all of this legwork that Linda did, and she built up an audience through her podcast. She had no support from NPR. She had no corporate support. It was all done like breaking the rules. So it was actually kind of a guerrilla project in a very sort of corporate public radio setting, and built this audience up under the noses of all of these people at NPR until one day they're like, holy shit, your podcast is really huge. Can we do something with it? And that's really what happened. I mean,
so you want to come back in the show is what you're saying.
So, I mean, the idea that you're going to instantly have a hit is also, that's unlikely. But if you can figure out how to build an audience, you can attract even 1,500 people. I mean, that's your Facebook feed or whatever. That's pretty cool.
Great. Let's open it up to questions. Where have we taken all the microphones?
We stole the mic.
Oh, we
I
stole
think
the
we
mic.
stole the mic.
Stole the Q&A mic.
Here, take a mic.
We're monsters.
Well, can you
This
come
one
up to the
wasn't working.
microphone and
It stopped itself.
because they're videotaping, so
Now
we
your
wanna get
microphone
everything.
won't work.
Hello?
Yeah, that works.
You have a 99% invisible show.
I know.
Wow.
Oh, yay.
Wow.
That's another great podcast.
Here,
Yeah.
here, here. Do you want this?
Here,
Yeah.
and you can keep it, or keep it on the mic stand.
So, first of all, thank you for being here. It's really exciting because I feel like I know all of you from listening to you so much. But I think what I'm going to say here is going to be a surprise to everybody in the audience, but according to a study by Edison Research that they released last summer called Share of Ear, podcasting was still only 1.7% of all offline and online listening. So what challenges do you think podcasting as a medium still has to really break out in the mainstream? And I'd love to hear.
I think there's a
everybody's
more
opinion.
recent one, right? There's a more recent Edison one, I believe.
So
that came out just recently that said share of your ear was way up.
The follow-up was that of the 1.7%, the people that do listen to podcasts, they listen to a ton. But I don't think that's
there's
a
more
surprise.
recent one than last summer. I think there's one that came out recently.
And what did it say?
It said it was substantially up.
But I saw that one too, and it also breaks it down into
Yeah,
the people who listen to a lot of different things. But it's substantially up, but that could be 2%.
Yeah.
That would be 100% up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally true. I think one of the biggest problems is, it's kind of the blessing and the curse is that, look at this room. Most of the people in this room are under the age of 35, maybe? Something like that. I mean, you're the people who, are used to just skipping around and listening to whatever the hell you want. You're not supposed to be able to do that. It's part of it is the age of the audience and how used to listening to audio on your phone you are.
Yeah.
So is radio doomed?
I'm not here to comment on that.
No, I mean, not at all. I mean, I think that radio still has a long lifespan only because there are 75 million baby boomers still alive in America, and they're going to live for a long time. And look, frankly, so, we got...
Only because.
Yeah.
Those are my favorite words there.
Radio is still great. I mean, people still want a curated experience, and that's what radio is. That's what public radio is, and they still want that sort of experience of serendipity. I like listening to All Things Considered because, there'll be a story that I'm not that interested in, but I'll listen through, and then there's something that just wows me and amazes me, and then something that's really cool, and that's just, I don't control it. It just comes up, and so I think there's still lots of people in this country who love radio. It's really easy to get. It's accessible. It's free. But in just a brief answer to your question about the future of digital listening, I mean, I think the answer is I don't know. Serial had a huge impact. Serial was a game changer because Serial is like at a Hollywood level. People were talking about it in ways that people don't even talk about This American Life, which is such a hugely significant, institution in our world. And I think that we will start to see more and more growth. But even if it's 1.7 or 2%, you're still talking about 12, 13 million people in the country. It's still fairly significant, and it's a pretty important audience because it's an engaged audience. It's an audience that's connected to the people they listen to. You're wearing a 99% Invisible shirt. You know Roman Mars. You may not know him, but you loved that show enough that you went and pledged and got that shirt, and you're committed to that show enough. You are worth, certainly in the eyes of advertisers, 1,000 radio listeners who are just passive listeners and may not be engaged in the show in that very moment.
Great. Thank
you.
Hi. I actually am myself a young radio producer, but for Sirius XM. So, yeah.
I like the fight noise.
Thank you. I actually work. One of you missed one of Guy's accomplishments, which is that he hosts a news segment for kids.
Oh yeah, that's right.
my channel.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
Kids Place Live on Sirius XM. If you don't have kids, don't listen to it. But something that I've kind of come to find is the programming director that I work for is female. And I notice a lot that I think she's often aware of how she comes off as female. Like she's always kind of thinking about, especially because we talk to really little kids, like 5 years old. So if you have a female host who is not constantly presenting herself as fun but also intelligent and inquisitive, it can be a little bit troubling, I think, maybe to parents. So I want to know, obviously NPR's, I think, listenership is very liberal, open-minded. Baby boomers, yes, but as you said, we're all very young. So my question, if I can find it, is do you feel a sense of responsibility in the way that you project your beliefs, theories, ideas into your audience? Like, what if you are just becoming the mouthpieces for, like, a new generation of young people?
I've been talking too much, but it's occupational hazard. So the tiny story that I'll tell about that one podcast, and we have done 70 of them or something, is that we had a long discussion in the newsroom about how we would portray the voice of Thurgood Marshall, because there is no recording of his dissent. And there was a lot of sort of, we're on a shoestring, we can't hire an actor. What you do when you're going to portray Thurgood Marshall is you hire an actor. I mean, you don't just kind of say like, you do it, So we were just going to say, well, if you can't do it that way, then you're like, well, what do we find? Do we go and say like, oh, you're black, you should voice him? Or do you say not do that? Like, what do you do? And we came to this point where we said to ourselves, we can't be part of the culture that whitewashes voices of justice. We have to find a voice that has some weight here, because it would be a misrepresentation of his voice to let a white man or a woman or anyone but someone with that kind of weight on those issues, which is why I went to Clarence Page, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and very vocal on these things, and luckily a friend from years of covering Washington, and he was like, yeah, and I went to his house and recorded it at his dining room table. But, the voices you put out there, especially when you're at the caliber, certainly of these people, are the thing that we worry about. We're journalists. Accuracy is number one. And accuracy is not just getting the facts right. In the case of this podcast, it was portraying Thurgood Marshall in a way that was responsible.
We have like 3 minutes. 6 people. So I'm trying to figure out how to do this fairly. At NPR, we have something called a super spot, which is like 2 minutes or less. And so we are gonna, if you can like keep your question to 45 seconds, and we keep our answers to like a minute, we'll go a little bit over. So, can you do it in like 30 seconds?
I work in commercial radio, so yeah.
Okay, great.
Linda Holmes, I have to thank you very much for you saying that you were aware that you started your podcast with just 4 white people and you wanted to transition to make sure that it's different voices. I really appreciate that. I listened to the last episode and Glenn Weldon said, coming from a place of privilege and listening to this conversation, really, really like that. Thank you. My two questions for anybody on the panel. Are the elements of a good podcast the same for good radio? And right now, pretty much anybody can jump in and make a podcast. As I see it, it would be bad for any kind of regulation to get involved. Are there any benefits to this business being regulated?
Well, I can talk about the first one really quick. I think the question is, what's different between a podcast and a radio place? I actually think that this is great for you guys because I feel like podcasting, for anybody who's interested in making stuff, podcasting is actually a blank slate. Like, I think what we've learned over the last year by listening to Serial, and also there's this podcast maybe people have heard of called The Stranger, which did this series called Love Hurts. I think what we've learned is podcasting can accept a lot more detail and a lot more intimacy than than radio can, and actually a lot of the assumptions that the people here were raised on in terms of attention and a whole bunch of other things, they're not true of podcasting. I feel like podcasting, it's not a new medium, but it's like a new form, and I feel like that's very exciting, and people need to explore what it can do in a whole variety of ways, and hopefully people will. And so that's the answer to your first question, which is is there a difference? I think there is a big difference, and it hasn't been explored yet what podcasting can bear, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Anyone want to tackle the second?
I can't think of any reason why regulation in this case would be when you talk about radio, you're talking about things that come on in the car that people aren't necessarily prepared for. With podcasting, it's on demand. It's something that you're seeking out. So if I remember anything from law school.
Let me say one thing again. I'm sorry. Is this going to work? Hello, yes. Podcasting is regulated in one way, and that is the ASCAP and BMI licenses you have to use music that's put out there. We're in a position where I have never until just now maybe been able to use commercial music because you have to pay per download. There was a decision by the Supreme Court that made it pay per download, which even if you're the smallest podcast in the world, so you're really kind of screwed that way if you're starting something new.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's hard.
I'm a young radio professional also, and Linda, you pointed out that the producers often kind of get screwed on these things. Mm-hmm. What advice do you guys have to young producers and people who are trying to break into the industry or move up in the industry from that side of the microphone?
I think that it's important to get involved in projects that you love and that you're passionate about, but it's also important to advocate for yourself because it is an invisible job to the people who are listening to the show. And I think, as I said, when you listen to our show, you can sort of look at me and Stephen and some of the people on the show and say, well, they have jobs. They have jobs. They're kind of taken care of. This is kind of part of what they do. And it's easy to see it in that kind of New York Times way of you push the button and Serial comes out. But the invisible job is our producer's job. And that's where you realize there's an entire person who needs to be funded in some way. And so I think as a young producer, you have to develop the ability, first of all, hopefully to develop the kind of relationship with the people that you're working with that they will advocate for you because they may have more juice than you do. They may be able to say, this is the only thing we ever ask for is funding for our producer. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what we do. And so, develop those relationships, I think, and advocate for yourself, because it can be an invisible job.
Hi, my name is Michael Lippin. I'm a broadcaster here with Voice of America in DC, and I work for the English radio programs of VOA. We're not public radio, we're not commercial radio, we're 100% government-funded radio, so the funding model is a bit different. But we're currently revamping our English news programs for radio, and we're experimenting with the podcast model. And I'm curious to know what social media tools you've all used to get successful interactions with your audience, and what techniques have been the most effective to build audience and to retain those audiences.
That is a question for Linda to answer.
Twitter. We used to like our Facebook page until they started burying all of your posts and not showing them to the people that are trying to follow you. So we don't use Facebook as much as we used to. We use our Twitter feed. We're trying to think of whether there should be another thing. I think right now the best one is Twitter, unless you're cool enough to have a Tumblr, which we are not yet, but maybe soon. You never know.
The best way to increase your podcast numbers is to get on other podcasts. Yeah. Because the thing that's true from what we were talking about before is that people listen to podcasts, listen to a lot of podcasts. You all know that just from who raised their hand earlier. So if you can collaborate with anyone who has a podcast, you're likely to pull some of their audience over and to give them some of yours.
I'm just curious, you two kind of cross promote. Does that help?
Well, yeah, I mean, the way that I'll answer it in a different way, which is the way that in Invisibilia, which is 5 weeks old, built that audience was I went to Ira and I said, I'll give you an hour for free if you put me on your show, and Lulu went to Jad and said the same thing. So yeah, I agree with the idea that that's a good way to do it. Get your content in front of people who actually do have audiences, and then we do the kind of we all do the cross promotion.
And some of the cross promoting thing, I think it's hard to tell exactly what the effect of that is. I think it helps in certain cases, more than others, but. Mm-hmm.
I'm an interested listener, and I had 2 questions, one for Linda, one prompted by Linda. Okay. The first one is, are you guys going to do 50 Shades?
Here's the answer. We aren't. However, yesterday I taped an entire show about romance novels with 4 people who love romance novels, one of whom was Sarah Wendell, who runs Smart Bitches Trashy Books, which is the best site ever. 4 of us who love romance novels talked about them for an hour. So we're not doing 50 Shades, but we did talk a lot about sex scenes in books. So that's that.
Okay. And then the second one was, one of the things that you said on Twitter about Serial was that it's not cut to time. And I was wondering if any of you guys had thoughts about using the podcast form to be looser and tighter with your time. And for those of you who are simultaneously or sometimes also going to radio, are you looking at cutting different shows for the radio and the podcast?
Yeah. We do that. So we try to be disciplined with the podcast. They're generally 52 minutes, 53 minutes. But if there's really great stuff that we want to put in there that we had to cut out for the radio, the podcast might be 55 minutes one week or 54 minutes. The radio show is always going to be 52 something. I can't remember the exact length because of the breaks on public radio stations. But yes, I mean that's the beauty of the podcast is that we can extend the show. It's a little bit longer normally, and there's more content, which is wonderful because there's nobody saying it has to end here because I've got to talk about news, traffic, and weather.
And we do the opposite. Actually, we have in the past and are continuing to. Our podcast is up to about a half an hour. Occasionally it's gone over, and we'll cut an 8-minute segment. So we'll cut a shorter segment that'll fit on an NPR station in the segments that they're already split into.
Oh, do you have? I mean, you do both radio and.
We do both radio. I mean, I think that there is great opportunity with podcasts to play. You're not under the same constraints. Thus far, we haven't. and I'm very interested in that. Like, you could do, theoretically, like a 3-hour story, and somebody should, and see if it works. But and then you can do much shorter, and things can live where they should live, rather than having to fill the hour. We do roll-offs for the shows, the morning and afternoon shows, Morning Edition and ATC, and those are so far we haven't cracked how to make them good. That's what I would say.
Candid.
The last three. Do you guys mind waiting a little bit? Okay. These are great questions. So these are the last three. So no one think about going up to the microphone.
I have a super short question, but before I ask it, I will say there is someone who's doing over 3 hours of podcast content. It's called Sleep With Me. The whole target is to put people to sleep.
I gotta look that up because that's what I use. Podcasts
So what do they do?
I listen.
What
to
are they? Are they talking?
I listen to it. I listen to it religiously.
And what do they? Do they talk
with a
or
cell phone? And it's literally a guy has a very deep, just kind of will put you to sleep voice.
Wow.
Talking about Game of Thrones. For like 3.5 hours.
Awesome.
For 3.5 hours, he talks
Yeah.
about Game of
Yeah.
Thrones. God, that is a job.
Cool.
And
I found it on Reddit. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So I had a like
Oh
I found
God,
out
totally.
I found out about this. My girlfriend invited me here, and I listened to Serial and I listened to Startup like religiously. Yeah. And Alex Bloomberg asked some great questions in one of his episodes about monetization, and I wanted to ask about just your thoughts about how podcasts are monetized. What are some areas, maybe that could be targeted for better monetization or better social sharing to capture more listeners? Like, there's not an application, like the closest one to think of is Stitch, where you could get just like a Stitcher, where you get like a feed of that, but it doesn't allow you to share it on things like Twitter, really.
Right.
So
I think they're working on all that stuff. Podcasts really remain an evolving thing, and as I said before, to me, the single thing that's going to control how much we're able to capitalize on the vast possibility of podcasting is whether you can accustom people to that ethos of kicking a buck, which is to say, if you can listen to something for free. If you can get people accustomed to saying, yeah, but I need to think about, I like that show, so where do I send my buck? Where do I send my $5? It's a little different in public radio. It's funded differently. There's a whole thing. But if you're talking about a lot of other podcasts, they just need literally, Jesse Thorne the other day was literally asking for $1 for the video show that they're working on. And means it. Because if there's a lot of people, it only has to be a little tiny bit of money. So, but everybody's still trying to figure all this out, don't you think? And your show is more like that.
I'm probably the closest to the money. Than anybody here, just because I worked at NPR and it was so great to be walled off from the money. But even there, I was giving speeches to donors to NPR also. So there's that game is sort of like this stuff has to be funded. But ways to monetize it, we're doing exactly the same thing you're doing and Alex is doing, which is like beating our head against the wall to figure out how to make money doing this. Before you get to the point of having 10 million, downloads or whatever a month. It's the big question. So, when you come up with something, give me a call, RadioBabe @RadioBabe on Twitter. And let me just say that my first producer, that one that I talked about hiring, is Lena Masitzis, who went to Startup later. So to answer the earlier question about how you get into this, always get involved with projects you love, even when you have to live on ramen to do it.
Yeah. Thank you. I would just add very briefly to that, that I'm not sure. It's hard to know whether podcasting is going to be, a huge success financially. I think some podcasts will make money, most won't. The question is whether, in the wake of Serial, big media organizations will get into the act, because they're not right now. I mean, there's no huge news organizations have an audio podcast that either if they do, it's unknown. It's like somebody in the basement who's doing it, or they don't do it at all. And if they think that they can make money off of it, they will do it. But even if they know that they can't make money off of it, but that it's a tool for engagement, I think that big media organizations will start to get in on the game because it's like the equivalent of having a brick and mortar shop. It's like another avenue to push out your message and your ideas. And even if you get 50,000 or 100,000, for a company like, I don't know, Rolling Stone or the NBC Nightly News or something, which has a podcast, but it's just the news. That's worth it to them if they can build a really engaged audience.
So how quickly can the next two people ask their questions, and how quickly can we answer them?
Very. Okay, I'm a newspaper reporter, and I'm interested in starting a podcast, but I know those are very different writing styles, so I was wondering any advice you had or tips.
I would say just make sure. Well, writing. You're thinking of like actually just writing it as writing, and speaking it. I mean, I would just try to sound as much as conversational as possible. Somebody that Strangers podcast. She does a lot of writing, but they're written, but she makes it sound really natural, I think.
Yeah, it's easier to just start talking and cut that into a great podcast than to write something, read it into a microphone, and cut that into a great podcast.
Yeah, you might
write bullet points.
Or get a friend to sit with you as you talking to them, like you're telling them the story, whatever story you want to tell. That might be a good way, and then you can cut that down on your computer.
Hi, I moved back from London after 6 years, so I'm really out of this podcasting thing, and I even have a Samsung, so I don't know if I can broadcast. Anyway, I got stuck on a first date, and the guy said, "Let's come here." And so my vision of radio was Rush Limbaugh and Howard Stern, and I was like, oh, goodness. So I was really pleasantly surprised to see four women on the stage, and I wanted to know what was the dynamics behind that. Is that NPR? Is it the number of women that are audience members? Is it maybe, I know in the business world sometimes women get frustrated because they're not getting the anchor chair, and they go off and find their own, kind of their own little area where they can shine. So if you can just shed some light on the dynamics here.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. Outside of public radio, podcasting is incredibly dude. It's an incredibly dude space. Dude. It is such a dude space. You wouldn't believe what a dude space it is. The number of podcasts that are really popular that are hosted by women is depressingly small. And
except for the number one and number two.
Yeah.
Well, right, has been, but those are, like I said, outside of public radio. When you go outside of public radio, you see, when I was talking about all those conversational shows, and they're working on this at some of these places, like Earwolf has a couple of them. Aisha Tyler, that's what I was just going to say. Professor Blastoff is fantastic. Aisha Tyler's show is really, really wonderful. There are exceptions, but it's a very male space, and so, but public radio is has always had tons of women hosts, tons of women in charge. It is one of the coolest places to be a woman in media, I think, in the world, because it's super incredibly supportive. That is something that I adore about working in public media. But outside of public radio, and and Andrea's show, which came from public radio, and it's kind of like when you get outside that world, fellas, and more fellas, as far as the eye can see. Yes.
There are like tons and tons of lists of women-hosted podcasts because there are so few of them. So you can look them up, and like I'm always on a list somewhere of like women. I'm like, oh, do I have to be like known for that? Just being a chick?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your patience. Please thank the panelists for their great job.